In Dublin, the dead grow smarter after death. And now, those once thought fools in life come for the ones who called them that. The Dunning-Kruger effect of the dead. Dublin slept under a misty, drizzling rain. Inside the city morgue, silence was broken only by the steady hum of the refrigeration units and the faint crackle of an old fluorescent light. Fiona O'Connor, senior forensic pathologist, was finishing the autopsy of Jimmy Kavanagh, a laborer who had died in a fall from a construction ladder. On the surface, a routine case. Closed head injury, no signs of struggle. She removed her gloves, entered the final notes into the protocol, and glanced automatically at the EEG monitor connected for routine residual activity checks. The screen flickered. The line that should have been flat twitched and began tracing sharp spikes. The pattern was odd, not the random post-mortem impulses, but ordered oscillations, like the curve of focused thought. Fiona checked the plugs, tapped the casing. The device was fine. A sudden thought struck her. In life, Kavanagh had loved to argue, without realizing how little he knew. Her lips pressed into a thin line. Memory flashed. "Sorry, may I ask?" A different room, years ago. Residency. A young orderly hesitating in the doorway, trying to understand why a patient's EEG was dancing at 0. Fiona, still too sure of her own infallibility, had cut him off. Stupid question. Post-mortem artifacts. Someone in the room had chuckled. The orderly had lowered his eyes. The recollection returned like a needle prick. Something moved on the table. Kavanagh, slowly, as if waking, sat up. His gaze was not empty but intent. He reached for the tray, took a marker, pulled a clean sheet toward him. His fingers moved fast, assured. Lines, formulas, diagrams. At the bottom he wrote, "Grade 0/100, and then struck it through, replacing it with a neat fraction, like a precise limit. Fiona froze, her hands unresponsive. A minute later, the corpse set down the marker, lay back, and closed his eyes. On the EEG, the flat line returned. She approached. On the sheet, a mathematical derivation, the steps beyond her grasp after the second line. The handwriting was steady, almost school-like. Below the formulas, a short phrase. They were all wrong. Fiona slipped the sheet into a folder, switched off the recording, and held her breath as if afraid to disturb a new order of things. "Where did I go wrong?" she whispered, and shut the cabinet. The next morning, Fiona arrived at the morgue earlier than usual. The sheet with the formulas lay in her bag, sealed in cellophane like evidence she didn't yet trust. She opened the archive and began flipping through the cases of the past months, first quickly, then more slowly. A montage of entries, like metronome beats. Case 1. Laborer, 42. Supervisor's note in the file. Slows down by the end of the shift. On the night recording, he assembles a miniature lever mechanism from tweezers and paper clips, labeling the diagram. Initials MK. Later, Fiona will notice a tiny mechanical latch beside it. Case 2. School janitor, 51. Internal report. Sweet, but not very bright. Camera captures a DNA helix made from surgical gloves on the floor and a deliberate sequence of door slams, like a code. Name, Mara Quinn. Case 3. Garbage collector, 39. Assessment. Can't count quickly. On the back of the form, drawn in marker, 2 loops converging into a figure 8, a Lorentz curve. Signed, Patrick Doyle. Case 4. Assistant worker, 21. Teacher's note. Algebra isn't for you. At night, he arranges a series of puzzles on the table in increasing difficulty and solves them blindfolded. In every case, in life, labels. After death, work requiring focus and talent. EEG logs confirmed it. Not post-mortem spasms, but stable cognitive cycles. Fiona leaned back in her chair. For a moment, she wanted to dismiss it all as artifacts, faulty sensors, network interference. But her mind stubbornly returned to that residency scene, where she, quick to judge, had slapped a stupid label on someone's question. If knowledge was power, how much of hers was arrogance? And now, was she seeing vengeance in every noise, simply because she feared acknowledging her own blindness? She opened a report from 2 weeks ago. The camera showed Patrick Doyle rising, approaching the staff door, entering a code precisely, and leaving. The door closed. 2 days later, his former supervisor was found dead in his car. No signs of violence, but the meticulously calculated ventilation setup depleted oxygen in 20 minutes. Fiona reached for the alarm button, and then on the archive panel, a new icon flashed. A black triangle on a white background. Play. As if someone had pressed play without asking. Fiona went to see Dr. Aidan Murphy at Trinity College. The office smelled of dust and the ozone from instruments. She told him everything, the formulas, the EEG logs, the vanished bodies. Murphy listened, squinting, then spread diagrams across the desk. No mysticism, he said, no quantum hocus-pocus. We're looking at a rare combination of 3 factors. 1. Disinhibition. After death, inhibitory interneurons degrade first. The brain's biohandbrake is released. Suppressive circuits vanish, including those tied to social fear and self-criticism. 2. Glial energy burst. As glial cells die, they briefly feed neural networks. A surge of metabolites grants a last window of plasticity. 3. Microstructural coherence. At the edge of breakdown, disparate circuits sometimes synchronize. Windows of heightened cognitive integration. I call it the Postmortem Cognitive Paradox, PCP, he concluded. The brain loses much, but for a moment becomes lighter, cleaner in its calculations. Fiona stayed silent. Inside, something echoed. Last year, she had corrected a junior colleague's cause of death finding to make her report look flawless. The error hadn't altered the court's conclusion, but she hadn't fixed it. Vanity, like a fine crack in glass. And another thing, Murphy added, some of these awakened don't go out to kill, they fix. He showed her a report. Someone had patched cracks on a pedestrian bridge, leaving a perfect chalk diagram of load distribution on the railing. In another hospital wing, someone had rearranged carts and recalculated routes. In the morning, nurses saved minutes on rounds, and a child with asthma got his inhaler in time. No cameras, no traces, just tidy formulas and arrows. But there are those who do take revenge, he said quietly. Their logic is cold. They don't know they're dead, Fiona. To them, the world just became clearer. The phrase rang in her head all the way back to the morgue. She opened her unofficial list. Names, notes, dates. The scrolling stopped. In the expected column, her own name blinked. Beneath it, in neat handwriting, "Will understand when it's too late." Fiona stared at the table of names. Tidy, almost school-like handwriting. Between the familiar ones was one that made her mouth go dry. Sean Byrne. The orderly from her residency, the one she had told, "Stupid question." Beside it, owes an apology. She scrolled further. Some entries clearly meant revenge. Said I was stupid, destroyed my work. Others, strange fixes. Retune pediatric ventilation. Adjust school crosswalk light. The list wasn't only about punishment. It was about order, about an exam. A thick envelope dropped onto the table, no return address. Inside, a copy of the same list, but on the back, someone had drawn in black marker a go board position. Stones forming a classic pattern with a central point. Signature in fine letters, P. Doyle, Tengen, San San, Kema. Another packet, a small velvet pouch. Inside, a ring puzzle. 3 interlocked steel rings, held by an invisible catch. On the inner side, tiny engraving, 08.10, the date of her public jab at Sean. Fiona dialed his number, unreachable. She wrote an email, "I'm sorry," deleted it, wrote again, Short, without excuses. Sent. The reply came within a minute, but not from him. An image of the go board position and one line. Find the only saving move. No greeting, no signature, just the problem. She sat in the dark, turning the cold rings in her fingers, trying to guess what was expected, repentance or solution. On her laptop screen, where the list was open, a tiny indicator blinked, a countdown. Midnight approached, each second striking like a tap on the glass. 5 minutes to 0, Fiona placed the puzzle on the table and said aloud, "Sean, I was wrong." The hand reached 00. Nothing happened. No light, no sound. Somewhere in the house, something clicked, as if old pipes had shifted to a new scheme. The silence thickened, and in it, she felt for the first time that the problem hadn't ended. It had only just been set in motion. Fiona knew she couldn't win alone. She called Michael Keenan, a former detective fired after reporting conscious dead. He had linked 3 accidents into one scheme and demanded exhumations. The board called it paranoia. His file contained another note. A year earlier, his sister had died due to a wrong oxygen delivery route, a route someone fixed after her death. Michael believed late genius had come too late. They met in an empty pub on the outskirts. He moved carefully, like someone afraid to spill evidence. On the table, he absent-mindedly arranged beer mats like stones on a go-board. On the fogged glass, he traced the Lorenz figure 8. He left the bartender a note suggesting moving the fire extinguisher closer to the exit. Obsession, yes, but also empathy. He knew the names of janitors, orderlies, technicians, the unseen. On the wall hung a map of Dublin. Michael marked every case where dead geniuses had altered something. The points formed a shape like butterfly wings and a tractor. "This is Doyle," he said. "He's building a form, the city as an equation." That evening he called. "One of them's moving. Old dockside warehouse. Signed Mar..." The line cracked. "Marquin." Fiona found his car with the door ajar. Nearby, the dark warehouse. Inside, the smell of metal and salt. Overhead, a system of counterweights. On the floor, greased tracks for silent movement. And the same mechanical latch, a small steel tongue linked to a sequence of steps. Chalked beneath, "No noise, you'll have a chance." On the car seat, a voice recorder. Fiona pressed play. Heavy breathing. Pause. Michael's voice. 1 move calculated. 2 left. Too even a rhythm, as if the breathing had been cleaned by a filter. Too pristine a recording, as if the real port noise had been erased. She looked up. In the doorway hung his coat. On the lining, a fingernail-scratched pattern of 2 loops. No signs of struggle. No signs at all. Had he returned? Been recruited? Rewritten? Fiona switched off the recorder. The last echo sounded unnaturally perfect, like synthetic sound tailored to human cadence. You can't beat them with their own logic. That meant randomness against predictability. Fiona planted fake traces, geolocations in old EXIF data, unlocked doors, a silly 4-digit code on the tablet. In the morgue, she arranged meaningless objects. 3 unsynchronized alarm clocks, a transistor radio without an antenna, a periodic table with 2 elements swapped, and a cage with a sparrow that occasionally pecked at an empty water cup. On the floor, dozens of identical envelopes, each containing a single blank card. A noise of meaning stripped of meaning. At midnight, the door stirred. Mara Quinn entered. Her movements precise, gaze cold. She froze. Alarm clocks ticking in clumsy 3-beat rhythm, radio spitting white noise, sparrow fluttering, monitors flipping random system windows. Mara stepped toward the table, saw the table's error, turned toward a sound, and lost her center. Her mind sought a pattern, but every hypothesis collapsed into the next absurdity. "Sorry," Fiona whispered, and hit the button. Murphy's device pulsed, short as a camera flash. Quinn's body twitched and slumped like a switched-off machine. On a neighboring monitor, new spikes rose, then formed the familiar sign, 2 Lorenz loops. Patrick Doyle had taken the blow. The network hadn't collapsed, but condensed. Fiona turned on the recorder and spoke briefly, without embellishment. I overrated myself. I didn't know. If this is an exam, this is my first honest answer. She left the recorder on the table, running. In the ceiling speakers, static rasped into silence, then resolved into a voice. 1 move left. Now it's your turn, Fiona. Too even, as if a filter had leveled the breathing. Too clean for a night in the morgue. Was it Michael? An imitation? A new match? Screens blinked off, then back on. The internet was disconnected, but on the tablet popped up a notification. No sender, no network. Lecture Hall 13, 9 o'clock. Fiona closed her eyes and allowed herself a second of fatigue. Then she took the folder with the formulas, the recorder, and the sparrow's cage. If their world was a board, she would at least choose which stone to play. By 9, Fiona climbed the empty stairwell of the faculty building. The plaque on the door read, Lecture Hall 13. The lock clicked open by itself, as if she'd been expected. Inside, silence. Wooden rows of benches, the smell of old chalk, and the faint tang of formalin. In the seats, those whose names she'd seen in the reports. Kavanaugh, the school janitor, the garbage collector, the woman with the heart attack. An empty place with a tiny mechanical latch on the desk, Mara Quinn's signature. Each had a notebook and a sharpened pencil. At the lectern stood Patrick Doyle. He held chalk in the steady hand of a lecturer, drawing 2 converging loops, the familiar attractor. Beneath, a coordinate grid, a time arrow. "Take a seat, Miss O'Connor," he said calmly. "Today's test is on honesty." Fiona sat in the front row. Before her lay a blank sheet. Doyle didn't ask questions. He simply watched, as in an exam where the student must name the subject they truly know. For a while, she listened to her own breathing. Then she picked up the pen and wrote in large, plain letters, "I don't know." After a moment's thought, she added below, "Sean, I'm sorry." She spoke it aloud, so the words wouldn't turn into a convenient tick mark on the conscience. The room responded oddly. In the nearest rows, something seemed to dim. They lowered their eyes, pencils stilled. In the back rows, the opposite. Something awoke. Someone straightened, their gaze sharpening, as if the problem had just grown interesting. Doyle paused, the chalk squeaking an extra line across the chart. He stepped into the aisle, took her sheet, read it carefully, returned it. "Good answer," he said without irony. "Far too rare." She turned the page. On the back was a stamp, "Permitted to retake." The grade line was empty, neither 0 nor 100, just a blank cell. Fiona looked up. Doyle was already drawing loops again, and the students bent over their notebooks, as if over a problem no one would solve before the bell. Somewhere outside, a clock began ticking. The exam wasn't over, it had only begun.